Hey everybody, Dr. Doyle here, and today I am here to talk about the third installation of our flowcharts, which will be iteration. So we'll look at the flowcharts as well as how to translate them into code, and in particular, what it would look like in MATLAB. So as a reminder, we are talking about flowcharts in the three different types of control structures that we'll find in algorithms and visually see in flowcharts. We've already gone through sequence and selection in my previous two videos, and now we're going to talk about iteration. So we're looking over here at the last type of control structure. So what do I mean by iteration? Well, as the name suggests, I'm talking about flowcharts that repeat themselves in some manner or do something one time and then iterate and do it again and again. And so iteration is going to repeat a section of code. And there's two types of iteration that we'll look at inside the structure of MATLAB. The first are for loops. And for loops repeat code a specific number of times. So we control how many times the code is run or repeated. There are also while loops, which repeat the code until some condition is met. Okay, so there's for loops, which repeat the code a specific number of times that we decide, and then while loops where you set a condition and the code is repeated until the condition is met. So we're going to take a close look at each of those individually, and we'll start with for loops. So for loops are going to end after a specified number of repetitions. So this is what the flowchart is going to look like. We're going to have a conditional, and we say n equals beginning, colon, increment, colon, end. Some set of statements are repeated, are done. It comes back and repeats until it gets to the end. In code, it looks like this. For index equals start, colon, increment, colon, finish, run your statements, and then end. Actually, to match my flowchart, this should say for n equals beginning, colon, increment, colon, end, run your statements, and then hit end, and then end. And so we're going to go through the different parts of the flowchart and the code to see what each one does. So n is an index variable, and it changes each time through the loop automatically. So every time MATLAB gets to that for statement, it increases n by the increment. Beginning, or BEG, or start, is the starting or initial value for n that you start. Sometimes we count, and so we started at 1, for example. The program is going to compare n with the value that you set in end each time through. So beginning is the starting or initial value for end, and then every time through, n is compared to end. If n is less than or equal to end, n and end, I know, a little bit confusing, but if n is less than or equal to end, the program will then execute the statements. When the program reaches the end statement, n, or your increment, or your index, is increased by the increment and loops back to the for, okay? And so it might increment by 1, or it might increment by 2 or 5, whatever we set it to be. And this process is going to continue until n is greater than end, and then the loop terminates. And we would come out to the side of our flowchart and go through the rest of the code. Here is just a summary. This is in your note sheet, but I'll read it aloud here one time. So the for loop operates as follows. The index, which we have used n in the flowchart and the piece of code that I provided, is a variable that is set at an initial value. A starting value, we called it BEG for beginning in this case. The program then compares the index with the desired final value finish, and we called that end in this particular case. If index is less than or equal to finish, the program executes the statements. When the program reaches the end statement, the index variable is increased by the increment, and the program loops back to the for statement. And this process continues until the index is greater than the finished value. Then the loop terminates. Let's look at an example. So here's an example of a flowchart. We have I equals 1, colon 1, colon 5. Each time it is in the loop, it's going to display I. So in code, this will look like this. For I equals 1, colon 5, display I, and then end. So I'm just going to describe what this means, and I've written it down as well so you can follow along either by reading or listening. So what this is going to do is first MATLAB is going to set I equal to 1. Then it's going to display the value 1 to the command window. Then MATLAB goes up and repeats. When it gets to that for statement again, it's going to increase I by 1. So now I is equal to 2. Then displays the value 2 to the command window. And then this is going to repeat. MATLAB is going to increase I, so I now equals 3. And a 3 is going to be displayed to the command window. And then a 4 will be displayed to the command window, and then a 5 will be displayed to a command window. After the 5 is displayed to the command window, MATLAB would loop back up, but when it increased I by the increment of 1, I would now be 6, which is greater than that end value given of 5, so the loop terminates, and it does not display 6. I would like you to try this on your own now. So in your handout and here on the screen are 2 more examples. And I would like you to try and write the MATLAB code and, just as I did before, be able to describe what each of these loops do. And what I really want you to think about is what's going to be displayed to the command window. So think about all the values that would be displayed to the command window. So it'd be good to pause here, try this, and then we'll look at it together in class next time we meet. But once you're done with that, come back to the video and listen about while loops. Okay, so I hope you had a chance to try those for loop examples. And now we're going to move on to while loops. And while loops are going to repeat as long as the logical expression is true. So these, we do not know how many times they'll repeat before we start the loop. So in general, the flowchart has a conditional statement with an expression that is going to take either true or false. If it's true, the statements will be executed. If it's false, they are not. Once you are out into the false, it doesn't ever come back. And as long as it's true, it will continue. So there are a few things we need to be careful about when we use while loops. And so this looks like while expression, statements, and then end. A few things to note here is that expression is a logical expression. So you're going to use those logical operators and those comparison operators and try to get a true false. The statements are executed, that's repeated as long as the expression is true. So the variables in the expression must be modified in the statements in order to avoid an infinite loop. So 2 things here. Number 1, we want to avoid a situation where this just repeats because we're never changing the variables that are written in our expression. Additionally, we have to make sure that we initialize the variables in the expression before we make the comparison, or else it'll never be true, and then you're just going to skip this loop altogether. Okay, so really looking out for those infinite loops are important, and here's a clue. If you ever get stuck in an infinite loop, you can hit Control-C while you're in MATLAB and it'll break that loop. So if you feel like maybe your loop is taking too long, just hit Control-C and it'll cut out of that loop. A quick example for you. Here's a flowchart where I set x equal to 8. Then I ask if x is greater than 0. If that's true, then I set x equal to x minus 3. So I subtract 3 from my value of x. Then I display x. And I repeat that until x is no longer greater than 0. And then I exit my while loop. In code, this will look like this. So I have x equals 8. And I say while x is greater than 0, x equals x minus 3. I display x, and then I end. So again, I'll describe what happens. So first, MATLAB's going to set x equal to 8. Then MATLAB's going to check if x is greater than 0. It is because x is 8, so it's going to come down to the next line and it's going to subtract 3. So now x holds the value of 5. So it's going to display that 5 to the command window and then end the loop and go back. Now I'm going to compare 5 to 0. 5 is greater than 0. So now I subtract 3 from that and I'm left with 2. So that number 2 is going to be displayed to the command window. I loop back to the while statement. X is still greater than 0 because 2 is greater than 0. So I am going to enter my loop. I'm going to subtract 3 from that value. So now x is -1. So I'll display -1 and then end. When I go back and check, x is no longer greater than 0, so nothing more will happen. So we will display to the command window the numbers 5, 2, and -1. So similar to the for loops, I would like you to now try these 2 while loops. Think about what the MATLAB code would look like and be able to describe in your own words what would happen, what will be displayed to the command window for these 2 for while loops. And we'll talk about these in class next time we meet. Thank you. See you next time.